Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm Morton Blackwell, president of the Leadership Institute. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our Wednesday Wake Up Close Breakfast. We have a wonderful speaker here, a man who does wonderful things for conservative principles, and I'm so glad he was able to join us. We live in interesting times, and these times are at least as interesting as other times, and I try in these breakfasts to get the morning papers and look and see something that I might comment on. And I take the Washington Times and the Washington Post, and there's always good stuff. There are many different things to choose from to comment on today, but I'm going to comment on an article that ran in the Washington Post this morning, and the headline is Allies Weigh Defense Fund for the President's Son. Very, very interesting. The article includes the sentence, Hunter Biden has paid the IRS more than $1 million in back taxes. And it discusses a parallel with the defense fund that was made for President Bill Clinton. It is extraordinary. And a lot of legal power working to defend Hunter Biden, but he's in big trouble. I encourage you to live tweet today's event. The hashtag is on the screens that you can see. If you can maybe get some other people to join us online. In 2022, the Leadership Institute trained 15,173 conservatives at 719 separate training programs. Since 1979, the Institute has trained 258,117 activists, students, and leaders. And you have before you at the table the Leadership Institute schedule for the upcoming months. Please take a moment to review those schools and consider attending one or sending a friend or associate of yours to the training. And if you're watching online, you can visit our website at leadershipinstitute.org/trainings to see upcoming online and in-person training. Now I pleasure to present to you Riley Ferguson, who will offer an invitation and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Riley is from Richmond, Texas, and is a recent graduate of Stephen F. Austin State University, where she pursued a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics and a minor in legal studies. In August, she hopes to attend law school and intends to work in the field of constitutional law. At college, she was president of the College Republican chapter. She worked as an intern for the George P. Bush for Attorney General campaign in Texas. She helped to organize efforts in East Texas to mobilize votes during a highly contested primary election cycle. Riley, would you step up?
Will you all please bow your heads with me in prayer? Heavenly Father, I just want to come before you today and thank you for bringing us all here today to enjoy a nice breakfast and fellowship with one another. I want to thank you for getting us all here safely, bright and early this Wednesday morning. I want to thank you for the blessing that is living in a country where we are freely able to pray to and worship you in our daily lives. I also want to thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to hear from Mr. Wood today. I pray that you guide him in wisdom and truth as he speaks. Thank you again, Lord, for your saving power of grace that you gifted us all on the cross. I thank you that this is nothing we could have ever earned, but only through your goodness and grace. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Will you all please stand with me as we do the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which stands one nation under God, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You all may be seated.
Our program's report today will be made by Zachary Marshall. Dr. Zachary Marshall is the editor-in-chief of Campus Reforms, and will be working at the Leadership Institute. Zachary is an adjunct professor at the University of Kentucky. He has a PhD from George Mason University and a master's degree in journalism from the Newhouse School at Syracuse University. He is also a member of the National Association of Scholars. Zach, will you come up and give us the program report?
Campus Reform is a project of the Leadership Institute that reports on moral bias and abuse in higher education. And just this last summer in 2022, we launched the Higher Education Fellows Program to elevate the voices of professors and college administrators who are concerned about academia's leftward shift. Campus Reform's Higher Education Fellows bring their unique experiences and perspectives to expand Campus Reform's effort to educate the public. LI's Higher Education Fellows op-eds have already been published on Campus Reform, on Fox News, and the Daily Wire, and our fellows have made appearances on Fox News, the Dr. Phil Show, BBC, and the Daily Wire's Morning Wire podcast in just the last 6 months. Working with these fellows, Campus Reform also launched the spring semester, the Office Hours program, to provide more one-on-one mentorship and opportunities to the college students who write for Campus Reform as freelance correspondents. Every week, fellows Adam Elwinger, Rob Jenkins, and Robin Latimer hold virtual office hour sessions and tutorials to help the correspondents on their core writing skills. The fellows work with my editorial team to structure the one-on-one sessions according to correspondents' individual needs. By raising the profile of the Campus Reform website and training correspondents, our fellows are helping Campus Reform reach more Americans and grow the size of the program. Thank you.
I want to mention that this point something that we do frequently, and we all do it more frequently, and that is thanking the donors of the Leadership Institute. We have a number of generous donors here. I thank you for your support. The Institute is growing rapidly, very rapidly, programmatically, financially, and even physically, and it's all this growth is possible from the donors. 2 years ago, the Leadership Institute total revenue reported to the IRS was $20 million. A year ago, the annual revenue was $30 million. We have our tentative total for last year, which I think is accurate. Last year, our revenue was $39 million. That's really substantial growth, and I thank you very much for your assistance. Now, I want to present to you Daniel Moore, and he will introduce our outstanding speaker. Our speaker, I have to point out to you, has been helpful to the to your Leadership Institute for decades now, and they are it's extremely important. So let's see. Well, okay. Daniel, would you come up, please, and introduce our speaker?
Good morning. Thanks for joining us here. I'm glad to introduce Peter Wood. Peter Wood serves as president for the National Association of Scholars since 2009. He was associate professor of anthropology at Boston University, where he also served as the president's chief of staff, and he also served as the provost for the King's College in New York City. He is the author of Wrath, America Enraged, 1620, a critical response to the 1619 project, and he is also the director of several books about American culture, including Diversity, The Invention of a Concept, A Bee in the Mouth, Anger in America Now, and Diversity Rules. Currently, he's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Academic Questions. In 2019, he received the Jean Kirkpatrick Prize for contributions to academic freedom. He's the editor-in-chief for the National Association of Scholars, Quarterly, Academic Questions, and writes frequently for Spectator World, The New Criterion, the Claremont Review of Books, American Greatness, and other publications. His topics usually include intellectual freedom, wokeness in higher education, the DEI movement, climate hysteria, and American culture. We will have a Q&A at the end. If you guys just want to hold your questions until then and wait for the microphone to come to you. Thanks for joining us.
Being an academic, I travel with a bunch of books. I get very nervous if I don't have them there. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really happy the Leadership Institute invited me. Most of my staff have been through Leadership Institute training, so I owe a debt of gratitude there. However, I'm deathly jealous. We're not in the league of a $30-some million organization. We're a very small, kind of nasty-tempered organization. I view my job is to make trouble, and my area of trouble is higher education. I view this as a wonderful moment for troublemakers like me, in that the American public has begun to wake up to what a bad deal American higher education has become. As that has happened, my membership, like the Leadership Institute's membership, has grown quite substantially. So has our financial picture, which has enabled me to go out and hire more troublemakers to give higher education the grief it deserves. Now, I assume when I talk to an audience that most of the people in it probably have never heard of the National Association of Scholars and never heard of me, so I bear the burden of trying to explain who we are and who I am. And there's various ways to do that. I could jump right in and tell you what we're doing right now. I could give you some of the history of the organization, or I could personalize this. Well, I don't usually do that, but for this audience, I think maybe a little personal element might be worthwhile. As I was introduced, I have a PhD in anthropology at the University of Rochester. I moved to Boston with my wife in 1981, and 1981 was something of an important year. That year was the first full year of Ronald Reagan's presidency. It was the year in which Midge Decter founded the Committee for the Free World, which was a movement of what we learned to call neoconservatives. And she began to collect a substantial number of people, some of them academics, who were worried about the Soviet Union, about the continued march of communism, which at that point pretty much looked unstoppable to all but a few people, Ronald Reagan being one of them. But to speak on campus as someone who was worried about the confrontation between East and West was to mark yourself out as some kind of crazy person. There were some crazy people, and I was just a graduate student at that point, still working on my dissertation. But in 1981, was also the very stirrings of what became the National Association of Scholars. Midge Decter handed her list of academics who had joined the Committee for the Free World to a professor at John Jay College named Stephen Balch. And Stephen Balch began to write to these people and assemble them. Out of that became an organization, wasn't yet called the National Association of Scholars, but that was the beginning of this sort of counter movement in higher education. NAS itself formed as a corporation in New York City in 1987. 1987 was my first sort of real academic appointment. I began teaching anthropology at Boston University, and through odd set of circumstances, I was also hired as an assistant to the provost, which was the beginning of a academic career for me of an odd type. I eventually became both a tenured professor of anthropology, but associate provost, the president's chief of staff. Some of you may remember the name John Silber as one of the most controversial college presidents of the 20th century. I worked for him. I wrote for him. I worked in an administration that pretty much meant that I would never have an academic career any place other than Boston University. I was marked as a pariah, and joyfully so. I was one of those people who thought somebody has to push back against this. In my mailbox in late 1987 arrived an issue of something called Academic Questions, issue number 1 of this fledgling organization. I already had heard about the National Association of Scholars, however, because the New York Times had run a front page story about this freaky thing. There are actually conservatives in higher education, and they formed a group, ha ha ha. And I said, well, this sounds kind of interesting. So I became a member of the National Association of Scholars very early on. Didn't really do much with it, attended some conferences, but I read Academic Questions cover to cover. It was a hot item in our office. When it came in, people were struggling to get their hands on it. Well, time moves on. Eventually, I left Boston University to become the provost of a small evangelical college in New York City, the King's College. I was there only about a year when Stephen Balch, the founder of the National Association of Scholars, called me up and said, I'm getting ready to retire. You have any interest in taking my place? Well, I was very flattered by that. Part of this was that there weren't very many people he could call upon who had both the experience of being a professor and some actual experience running things, because conservative professors don't usually get promoted up the line to deanships and provostships and things like that. So I swallowed hard, and I thought about it and said, okay. So I left my last academic position in 2007 and came to the National Association of Scholars, where I became the president in January 2009. The timing was wretched. The 2008 market meltdown had meant that the National Association of Scholars' base of support evaporated. Most of the foundations that had been giving us free operating money either disappeared or cut way back. Our membership had also cratered from a high of around 4,000 down to fewer than 1,000. So I became the president of something, finally, but became the president of something that didn't look like it was going to be around very long. Well, a lot of things had happened. I don't need to rehearse the history of the decline and fall of NAS, but I'd say what it basically amounted to is that Steve had decided, maybe wisely, that the best thing he could do would be to serve as a kind of Johnny Appleseed. He would go around the country and found centers on conservative thought, free institutions, things like that, at campuses all over the place. And he founded those, for sure. There were, by the time I came on, about 30 of them that he had created. He'd also created a bunch of parallel academic associations. If you're a historian, you belong to the American Historical Association. So he helped found the History Society. There were about 5 or 6 of these that he founded. But what he hadn't reckoned on was the phenomenon that we conservatives have now learned to call capture. Each of these organizations was soon taken over by its enemies, and it existed as a shell. The name was still there, but suddenly they were doing the same thing that the other places were doing. The nadir of this happened the year I became president of NAS, and that was the New York Times ran another story about NAS, above the fold, quite prominent story. This one was about those centers that we were founding. And they'd gone around and interviewed the heads of some of them, including one at the University of Texas, Austin, run by one of our members named Rob Coons. And it was sort of the maybe the most spectacular success of, it was drawing students, it had faculty, it was running important programs, and the New York Times made a big deal of that. The very next day, the provost of the University of Texas, Austin, called Rob Coons into her office, and fired him. He was a tenured professor, he still had his job, but to that center, I had no idea this was going on at my university. So he didn't abolish it, he kept, or she, I keep getting my pronouns confused here, that's a dangerous thing to do these days. She replaced Rob Coons with two other professors who instantly redefined what the Center for the Study of Western Civilization was all about. It was still called the Center for the Study of Civilization, but civilization was now expanded to mean everybody. So it wasn't the worst possible defeat, but it sure drove home the lesson to me that if NAS was going to survive, it wasn't going to be through a behind-the-scenes approach to spread the word through little centers here and there across the campus. Now, one of the first things I did was take that list of centers and hand it over to Jack Miller, who was one of the backers of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and he'd recently split off to create the Jack Miller Center for the very precise purpose of advancing these centers. I said, oh, you want centers? Here they are. I'm out of this business. So what business did I want to go in instead? Well, first I had to do something with fundraising. That is, we never had a fundraising operation. We didn't have a development officer. We just relied on these foundations and their generosity to keep us going. That wasn't going to work anymore. So I had to figure out how to convince people that we were worth giving money to. And it wasn't really a good value proposition, a shrinking organization that had run itself into the ground by betting on a proposition that didn't work. So what would work? Some of the best things that had come out of the National Association of Scholars over the previous 20 years had been a series of research reports, not many of them, one about every 3 or 4 years, but they were meticulous reports. They went on some subject on campus and went into fine detail explaining things that people should know about. And I'd read those reports. They were a lifeline to me for a long time. And I thought, well, this is something that we can do, and we do it well. The question is, can we find anybody who will think that it's important enough to bankroll it? So I started looking for people who had gripes in higher education and thought they weren't being heard and were willing to put some money behind it. Now, there were several fruits of that, but the one of which I'm most proud eventuated in a report titled, What Does Bowdoin Teach? Bowdoin being a small liberal arts college in rural Maine. Any Bowdoin graduates here? How about that? Well, the short version of the Bowdoin story is that a wealthy New York businessman of my acquaintance was an avid golf player and had what New Englanders call a camp, which was something more like a luxury resort in rural Maine. An avid golfer, he got invited by one Maine college to go out on a golf date with the president of Bowdoin College. And he thought not much of it. They had a good golf game and that was it. But a couple months president of Bowdoin College, a man named Barry Mill, fall convocation for all the returning students to the college and the faculty, and he told a story at that event. You may have some distant memory of this because it did make quite a bit of news at the time. That, he'd had of his life. He was out there just sinking everything. But then in the backswing, he was getting teeing up for the 10th hole. Suddenly, his golf partner, my friend, blurts in, "I hate diversity!" and he slices it off. And through the rest of the golf game, my friend keeps up this chatter about how terrible it is that colleges and universities are doing all this diversity stuff, and it just ruins Barry Mill's concentration. Well, unknown to Barry Mills, the marshal of his college, a faculty position, was one of my friend's friends, and called him up. You wouldn't believe what I just heard from the faculty convocation. Well, the man he picked on also happens to be, his name is Tom Klingenstein, the chairman of the Claremont Institute, and they published the Claremont Review of Books. He's a published and performed playwright. He's not some guy from the swamp who blurts out, "I hate diversity" on every occasion. He's a very sophisticated, well-mannered man. Well, his response to this was to write an article in the Claremont Review of Books titled "A Gulf Story," in which he, tongue-in-cheek, offers his advice as a playwright to how better tell the story. Your character doesn't work here, he wouldn't say that sort of thing. It was quite a deft and amusing thing. The students at Bowdoin College picked up on it, and they invited Tom to come to Bowdoin and debate Barry Mills. And Tom, who at that point I didn't know well, called me up and said, "Well, I've read your book on diversity. I like it a lot. I've got this invitation, but I'm not a public speaker, and I'll go, but only if you'll go with me." So I said yes. I met his wife shortly after that, and she said, "Just keep Tom out of trouble. He's going to say something provocative." We went up there. Barry Mills refused to show. Instead, he sent a memo out to the students saying, "Oh," they went anyway. So we had a good audience, a number of faculty members as well, and I kept Tom out of trouble. You know, the way you keep somebody out of trouble is by being more trouble. So I riled up the students a lot and had one of the students stand up and say, "You know what you're talking about. Bowdoin College gives us everything we could possibly want. You're saying we don't know stuff, but look, everybody in this room is taking AP US history. Ask me any question about American history and I'll ace it." Whoa. Okay, so these were smart guys. He said to me, "Well, we say that their education is shortchanging. And what we had in mind was that the college catalog hardly any courses on American history. The courses they did have were on women's history, black history, stuff like that. History majors were required to take courses on non-Western history, but no courses on American history." And we think, well, you are being shortchanged. There isn't a curriculum here being taught by well-qualified, but they're skipping subjects that you should know something about, and know that AP test that you aced is not a substitute for a real private college. So he turns to me and says, "Well, they don't believe us. What are we going to do? They say it's one way, you say it's another. What's it going to take to settle this?" I said, "Well, you know, $50,000, I'll do a little study and see what we can learn." Well, that 50,000 grew eventually to about 300,000. I hired a faculty, or a young graduate of the King's College, for that matter, sent him stonewalling us, saying, "Don't want you here, we have nothing to share with you." He instructed us to ignore. The message didn't get to the archivists in the library, and we ended up with 200 years of minutes from all of their internal reports over the recent decades. And we produced about, all told, about the most dense, dry as dust, footnoted to the hilt study of this one small liberal arts college. And we published it, and all hell broke loose. I started getting letters from numbers, but deans and provosts of colleges around the country saying, "I'm so glad you did Bowdoin. It could have been us." And for sure, it could have been. What we documented at Bowdoin in more detail than anyone had ever done before was what we now call wokeness in process. It was excruciatingly detailed to the point where we could sit down and just read it. but you could check in on it at any point and verify what we said, because I said it was done in a scholarly manner. Didn't put polemic into it. We simply explained what was going on, why it was going on, and how it got that way. And it's a fascinating story, and I can talk about it for a minute. Don't worry, I won't. The main thing that comes out of this is that I learned that the strength that I thought NAS really did have. We could do something that no other organization could do, partly because we were made up mostly of faculty members, scholars had been ostracized in their own departments and had a story to tell, if we could give them a place to tell it. Well, we published this journal, Academic Questions. It doesn't reach a very large audience, but people can tell their stories. I realized the bigger story we had to tell was in connecting to the important issues that were going on in higher, which people sort of knew about or thought they knew about, but they didn't understand in any real depth. And therein lies what National Association of Scholars is now. I said, the point of my troublemaking so far has been the story of the Chinese Communist Party in this room has now heard of Confucius Institutes. You've heard of Confucius Institutes because of me. What happened was in 2015, one of my faculty members in Ohio called me up and said, "Call us Confucius Institute to campus. I don't know what that is. You?" I said, "No, I have no idea what that is. I'll find out." Do. So we jumped into it, and my lead woman named Rochelle Peterson, very unassuming, modest, but sharp as a Ginzu knife, if you remember those. She went out to campus and only took a few days before we realized we settled in something much, much bigger than they had imagined. You know, this institute's all, they're here to engage surveillance of us. And then aside and said, "Meet me off campus, I'll talk to you." And I said, "You know what those Confucius Institutes are?" "No, what are they?" They're here to spy on us. They're recruiting us with China's acquisition of intellectual property. And well, that's interesting. So we went to Confucius Institutes. They wouldn't talk to us at all. We asked for the copies of agreements that had brought the Confucius Institutes to campus. Couldn't get those either. Eventually leaks. They turned to be agreements in which the university said that institutes under Chinese law, any disputes would be settled in Chinese courts. Well, what is a Confucius Institute? Ostensibly, its was being used in a similar fashion elsewhere. And the answer was yes. But actually, the University of Delaware was the hub of this. There was a woman in the residence life program there who was making her career out of selling essentially a Venn diagram with three overlapping circles, one of them economy, one of them social justice, and the third the environment. Sustainability happens when you've got the right kind of political correctness that makes these three circles cohere with one another. Well, that got me interested in what's really going on with sustainability. And I discovered the existence of something called the College and University President's Climate Commitment, which as someone who reads things closely and literally, I was stunned by. These were college presidents, and there were hundreds of them who had signed on to a statement that said that pursuing the goals of sustainability was the most important commitment for their institutions. Not liberal learning, not gaining knowledge of scientific facts, not becoming an informed citizen of the Republic, no, being committed to this movement, which basically global warming is going to kill us all. Let's get rid of carbon dioxide quickly. So I tried to sell this to my board of directors. They kind of grudgingly said, "Oh, we don't really think this is what the National Association of Scholars is about, but give it a try." whether the theories of global warming were so well established as to warrant reorienting all of higher education to promoting that cause, I had a bunch of members quit. I didn't have a whole lot of spare members to lose them, but I'm right about this, and I'm going to keep going. So my modest young woman, excellent Minzu knife researcher, Rochelle, went after the sustainability movement. She did so by showing up at their rallies, and they just took her as one of their own, and she kept being, without deceiving anybody as to who she was, she'd tell them, I'm from the National Association of Scholars. That's one thing about obscurity, it didn't send them away. She made it all the way to their national councils and was taking detailed notes on this. So we published our account of the sustainability movement and followed it 6 months later by an examination of the fossil fuel divestment movement, also by Rochelle. And I wish I could say that those things had had the kind of results that our work on China has had. But I do think that we're vindicated. Anybody who's paying attention at this point knows that the sustainability movement is a stalking horse for the globalist efforts to impoverish the West and to panic young people into a belief that their lives are going to be short and miserable and they might as well just focus on the apocalypse to come. So we're still in this space too. Okay, I think I've probably said enough to indicate what kind of organization we are. But if I've got anybody left here who still thinks I'm a good enough guy, well, I'm also pretty skeptical about the shutting down of the United States and the validity of a lot of those vaccines that were pumped into us. So you can put me on the skeptic scale there as well. And if there is any other really cause that is solidly loved by the American left and passively accepted by the majority of American people, you can trust that I'm against it. And I didn't even talk about the 1619. Yes, questions, please.
I suspect there may be a question or two.
Yes.
Please wait until you get the microphone.
As the mom of 2 college students, I very much appreciate your work. What do you have, or can you recommend other allied organizations that are offering solutions in terms of institutions, in terms of alternative certifications like you have in the IT field, for recovering this basic fundamental knowledge about American civilization?
Right. Well, we formed about 2 years ago something called the Civics Coalition, in which we've now partnered with 30-some other organizations, some of them very narrowly focused, some of them broader, but the idea being that we don't think we can repair the knowledge base of Americans all by ourselves, so we're working with as many people as we can on that. Recently, the Civics Coalition issued, under our authorship, something called American Birthright, which is our framework for how civics should be taught. It's now been adopted in a few school districts around the country. We're hoping for much broader distribution. I should say the National Association of Scholars is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We don't endorse politicians or political parties. That said, I would draw attention to Governor DeSantis's moves in this area. My time's up. Okay. Miami Herald yesterday says that he wants civics institutes founded at the University of Florida, Florida State University, and it's the third major, well, the three major public universities there. Now my time's up. He's fighting against the diversity, equity, inclusion regime. He's demanded basically an audit of the diversity stuff that's going on in Florida institutions. He's opposing critical race theory. I would say that if your daughters are at a university in Florida, things are looking bright. If they're someplace else, my sympathies. But what other organizations are doing this kind of work? Well, I think the Leadership Institute is in there, but you might think of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. It does work in this area. I'm afraid most of the names that I would cite as part of our coalition are not going to be familiar, but this has emerged into the political landscape in a way that few other issues in higher education have. Now, that connects things in a complicated way to the 1619 project, the efforts of Black Lives Matter to turn the curriculum in a particular direction. DeSantis last week got into the news for his refusal to accept the College Board's advanced placement African American history course and exam. That's a fairly complicated story in its own right, but what I would say is that when one of the potential nominees for the Republican candidacy in the next presidential election has decided to lead with both feet in the direction of the struggle over what kind of curriculum serves the interests of the American people, as saying, we've got a republic, we're not going to be able to take care of it unless the coming generation knows something about who we are and why we are that way. I would say that that brings it to the public stage in a manner that is going to affect the conversation, at least, on every college campus in the country. College presidents, being the spineless creatures that they are, will in some cases begin to bow to that public pressure. Not everywhere. Some of them are true ideologues on these matters. But it's a worrisome thing, not just about what's being taught, in fact, not so much about what's being taught, but about what's not being taught. What happens with these radical programs is that they crowd out of existence anything else. So it doesn't bother me that somebody learns in a college classroom what critical race theory is. It's a stupid theory, but they can learn about it if they want. What bothers me is that you get critical race theory and nothing else. And that, I'm afraid, from talking to students when I'm allowed near them, is what I see. There's just this vast well of ignorance. People don't know what's going on. You seem to be the most eager gentleman in the room, so. The man behind you. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Ron DeSantis is, leading the overall reform of Florida universities. He wants to eliminate or perhaps limit tenure. He wants to outright abolish DEI and CRT. And I know there are a number of states which are in the process of following the DeSantis lead in... No,
you got that wrong. DeSantis is following our lead. I mean, we've been in conversation with his people for a while, and those in other states too.
I know North Dakota is getting ready to eliminate tenure.
Well, there's a bill been introduced by one member of the House there.
Right, yeah. I've heard verbally that both Tennessee and Arkansas are working on it. What would you say about comprehensive reform?
What do I say about it? I'm a vigorous advocate of it. I think comprehensive reform is needed, but I also think it's probably too late. We're probably entering a period in which within a decade there's going to be many fewer colleges and universities left standing, and the American public is going to make up its mind that the college degree is no longer a valid value proposition. The idea that you're going to earn $1 million more by getting a college degree as opposed to going out and learning a trade is falling apart as we watch. Boys in particular are defecting from the pool of college applicants. So I want this kind of comprehensive change. If it succeeds, we will manage to keep this important part of our American society going, but it could well fail. There's a man in the back who's...
Excuse me, Peter, let me ask a question at this point. Back in 1968, I was executive director of the National College Republicans, and I spent 2 weeks in Florida organizing new college Republican clubs. And in 10 working days, I organized 11 clubs. One of those clubs was at a college in Sarasota called New College. In February of 1968, I set up a table and recruited members for the College Republican Club. It was a bizarre experience. Most of the students in February of 1968 went around campus barefoot. Lots of the men were wearing earrings, which is not wasn't certainly very common at that time. But Governor DeSantis has undertaken now to target New College, and using the powers that he has, he's is, I believe, going to give them a new board of directors and a new faculty, and this school, which has remained really a bizarre place which epitomizes now wokeness. Do you think it's possible for a determined governor to completely throw out unsatisfactory administration and faculty and completely turn around a college?
Well, he can certainly appoint a new group of trustees. He's just appointed 6, and I'm sure he'll appoint more when he gets the opportunity to. He is in for a hell of a ride on this. There will be endless lawsuits and stern resistance from the faculty who rightly see that their livelihoods are on the line. Can he succeed? Yeah, I think he can, up to a point. You mentioned New College. I'll at least throw this in. The first president of New College on his inauguration was something of a futurist, and he explained that by the year 2000, most of us would be living under the ocean. I would say New College has lived up to that wonderful reputation for far-seeing truth-telling. It is now under the ocean itself.
Well, we have time for perhaps 2 more questions. Why don't we take that gentleman in the back and somebody over here?
I was wondering if you had any comments on the money that's being given to the University of Pennsylvania by the Chinese at the Biden Institute.
Well, University of Pennsylvania certainly ranks in the top 10 of most corrupt institutions in the country. One of my board members is Amy Wax, who teaches in the law school there. You're referring to China's quite nefarious involvement with the president of, or the most recent president of the university. From what I hear from well-placed sources, the University of Pennsylvania is not only in cahoots with China, but is befouled in many other ways. So for those of you who are graduates, my apologies. It wasn't always that way, but these days it's reached pretty much at the bottom of the rankings. Sorry.
Last question.
Hello, my name is Anita, and I had a question about Maryland. We have a new governor, as you know, Wes Moore. I'm not sure if you paid attention to his inauguration speech or, what he intends to do, but the lady asked about, when people go to college. We now have in Maryland a situation where he's trying to put in one gap year between high school and university to do civic innovation serving. And he says he's setting up a new state agency devoted to service and civic innovation. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, when you read between the lines there of what he's trying to do, I think we can guess what that might end up being. I ran for office for state senate in LD 19. Very difficult to flip a seat over there, but how would you suggest we watch this, monitor it perhaps more actively than just perhaps talk about it? Thank you.
Oh, I'm actually being asked to fix something. Well, first of all, I would say a gap year before going to college is not at all a bad idea. In fact, a gap decade would be a little bit better. But that said, this is, I'm not familiar with the governor's intentions on this, and I will look into it. But my first response to this is that it sounds like the same form of teaching people to be political activists before they have any kind of ripened understanding of what that means. We are a self-governing republic. To be a self-governing republic requires knowledge of what you're governing. It requires personal self-governance, that ability to take yourself and your interests out of the equation and examine what's going to be best for the country or the state. So what do you want to see there? One would want to keep track of where these opportunities to volunteer are. I would expect that, given what most of these students have had in their secondary education, that they're going to be seeking opportunities to fight for environmental justice, racial justice, stuff like that. Not necessarily pernicious causes, but if you pay attention to the organizations that are taking advantage of this new pool of free labor, it would strike me that you would get a pretty strong indictment of a program that is meant to misprepare students for higher ed. You had a follow-up?
It's not free.
Not free.
No, they're going to be paid for 1 year to work and learn the skills that will help prepare them for the future.
Right. So they get paid, but the organizations that they're going to be working for are get it free. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Peter, I want to thank you. This is the first time you've ever addressed the Leadership Institute, and I hope it's not going to be the last. I can't tell you how many occasions his organization has been helpful and a good ally in promoting conservative principles. It's just wonderful for you to be here. And as a token of our appreciation, let me present you an Adam Smith tie.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I urge you to join us on March the 1st for our next Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. This is going to be an unusual presentation. In recent years, the Leadership Institute has, on 3 consecutive semesters, had some very outstanding young Peruvians come up and be interns for a full semester. They're all 3 of them extraordinarily bright. They went back to Peru. They organized something called the Leadership Institute Peru. They were scheduled to do their first public program in late March of the year 2000. I was scheduled to go down there, but COVID intervened, and that has been postponed. One of those three former interns was the youngest member elected in last year's national elections in Peru. In Peru, they have a unicameral legislature, and one of our interns is now a member of the Peruvian Congress. All three of them are going to be up here on March the 1st, and they're going to talk about the very interesting political situation in Peru. You may know that the Marxist president who was narrowly elected he attempted a coup. He was thrown out. There's considerable political turmoil there, and these three fine young men are going to come and talk about it on Wednesday, March 1st. Bradley Tenenbaum, would you step up here? I invite anyone interested in a tour of our Stephen P.J. Wood building and the Emerson and Dolores Wright Center for Campus Reform to meet Bradley here. She'll give you a wonderful tour through the through the building. I think you'll find it interesting to see our facilities here, and you'll surely meet a number of our excellent staff on the way. And if she can't answer a tough question that you ask, she'll pop up to my office and ask me to try to answer it for you. Thank you very much.